I want to take the next few minutes just to talk briefly a little bit about addiction and crack cocaine. We're going to go over what crack cocaine is, some of the effects it has on users, and how that relates to addictive patterns. So we'll begin by just describing what crack cocaine is. Crack cocaine begins as cocaine powder that is then combined with common household products and heated and cooked. And through that process, it forms crystalline chunks. These are solid chunks. And because of the sound that it makes as that process is happening of cooking the powder, mixing them with these household products, it often cracks apart and makes this noise. So it's part of the reason why it gets the name that it does. So cocaine powder mixed with common household products, cooked together to create solid chunks, crystalline form. And then this result, this solid chunk, is placed in a pipe and ignited, and the vapors are inhaled directly into the lungs. It is essentially smoked. The inhaled vapors produce an almost immediate whole body euphoria. You just feel from head to toe, it has been described as a whole body orgasm. So almost immediate high, whole body euphoria. It creates increased energy. It has a profound effect upon the body. The problem comes that when that high then comes to an end, when the chemical then is processed and removed from the body, what has typically been called the crash follows. And at this point, the person goes from whole body euphoria to deep feelings of depression, anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue. And of course, a strong desire then is built up to reacquire that sense of whole body euphoria and reacquire the drug in order to produce that feeling and to get rid of the feelings of anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue. So this pattern obviously builds on itself, which is why we talk about addiction here, that the addiction builds not only physically and chemically, that the body needs the material, but the person psychologically wants that feeling of whole body euphoria and wants to get rid of the feelings of anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue and depression. So there is this psychological as well as physiological need created for the substance. Therefore, it is highly addictive. When we talk about levels of use and how much is ingested, it creates different effects. So low levels of crack produced an increased heart rate, increased temperature, and increased energy, and decreased appetite. So not as hungry, increased heart rate, temperature, and energy. It also produces, along with this, constipation, insomnia, impotence, and weight loss. Because of this right here, just at the lowest levels, because of the elevated heart rate and temperature, elevated energy, decreased appetite, and depletion of the body of fluids, once again due to the increased temperature and other things like this, it produces the side effects of constipation, insomnia, impotence, and weight loss. Now, as the amount goes up that is consumed, it starts producing other effects, which of course are much more negative to the body. Things like convulsions, nausea, twitching, seizures, stroke, respiratory and heart failure, and ultimately death can ensue as the quantity ingested goes up. So crack cocaine, once again, a product of cocaine powder mixed with common household products to produce this hard rock-like substance that is then ignited, the vapors inhaled. The reason it's done is because of the almost instantaneous whole body euphoria, and the addiction comes in not only because of the substance itself is highly addictive physiologically, but psychologically. When the person comes off the high, they are almost immediately assaulted by feelings of depression, anxiety, paranoia, and fatigue, and in order to get rid of those feelings, they seek once again to find this substance to replace those negative feelings with the positive euphoria that they had before. It's a very dangerous substance, not only because of the short-term effects with the elevated heart rate, temperature, and energy, decreased appetite, producing some of these minor situations of constipation, insomnia, impotence, and weight loss, but the long-term effects as people increase the dosage and increase the amount that they're taking, leading to these horrible consequences of convulsions, nausea, twitching, seizures, stroke, and then finally breathing and heart failure, and ultimately death. It is a highly addictive substance, both physiologically and psychologically, and help is definitely needed if someone is using crack cocaine. If you'd like to learn more about this and things related to it, beneath this video there's a link. If you'll click on it, it'll take you to the website with that information, and while you're there, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. Today we want to go over just a few brief comments about a very advanced and convoluted in some ways topic, the neural correlate of attention, and just going over some of the points on one of the models that explain this. Basically, you have a situation where, say, a stimulus comes to an animal or a person under observation. Even though they're not paying attention to it, there is neurological firing. So there is neural pathways at work given the stimulus, even though there's no obvious particular attention being paid to that stimulus. However, it's also noted that if attention is paid to that stimulus, then even greater neurological firing takes place. And so basically we'll start with then one, let's say working memory has taken place. Stimulus has come in, the matrix has been provided, and now there is memory there, working memory, able to be analyzed and used. What part will then get access to that memory to use it if there's attention paid to it? One of the things in the model is a competitive selection, that within the patient, the person or the animal under observation, there are competing things within them to get access to that working memory. Some of those are from the top down, meaning higher cognitive functions are at work, and they are seeking to get access to that working memory to use it for their purposes. But sometimes it comes from the bottom up, meaning there are basically ingrained biological factors or instinctive factors at work, once again trying to get access and use the working memory that has been provided through the stimulus coming in. All these things are factored in and studied in as much detail as is possible, but basically you've got this idea of what is paid attention to, why is it paid attention to neurally, and the correlate basically says if some stimulus is creating attention, meaning neurons are flowing because of some stimulus coming in, even though the subject is paying no attention to it whatsoever, then once specific attention is paid to that stimulus, even more neurons will flow. And one of these factors will contribute to who get access to the working memory, what part, either from the higher functions or the more instinctive biological functions, in order to make use of it in that particular patient. Today in this video we want to go over a category of drugs that are abused or substances that are abused called inhalants. When we think about inhalants, what we're talking about is a chemical substance in a vaporous form that is brought into the body, ingested in the body through the lungs or breathed in. It's inhaled, thus the name inhalants. These chemical substances rapidly make their way into the blood system through the lungs. It's almost immediate, rushing to the brain, producing a reliable, fast, and brief intoxication. So it always happens, it's reliable, it's a very quick high because it's immediately introduced to the blood through the lungs, and it's brief. You don't have a long period of downtime afterwards. So if you're looking for a quick buzz, inhalants tend to be the way to go. Because of those things that are inhaled, these substances are legal, readily available. They can be purchased at almost any store. What you find then is that adolescents and pre-adolescents often abuse this type of substance. They can find it around their houses, or they can easily obtain it. It's easily transportable, hidden, things like this. And so therefore it is open to a great deal of abuse. And they are dangerous. They can cause both physical and psychological dependence, as well as brain damage when abused. I knew from my own experience in junior high, way back in the day, of a particular boy who was much older than the rest of us, and when you spoke to him, you realized something wasn't quite right about him. Why was he so much older than us and yet in junior high? Why did he have such a hard time communicating? Was it a learning disability? No, he had brain damage from abuse of inhalants. And for me, that became a living testimony to the danger of this particular substance abuse because of what it can lead to. The things that can be used and found around the house or purchased legally at most stores that tend to be used as inhalants are things like paint solvents, glues, cleaners, gasoline, liquid paper, nail polish remover, cosmetics, and other aerosol sprays. It is unfortunate that these things have a normal use, but yet through adolescence and pre-adolescence are finding another use as they seek to stimulate themselves physically through this method. It's reliable, fast, and brief. The most common side effect is headache afterwards. Of course, because it's a substance, a chemical substance that doesn't belong in our bodies, it can cause irreparable harm and damage to the brain. So it's something to be aware of and concerned about, even though it can be easily hidden because you don't see the effects of someone who's drunk for many hours while the liver metabolizes it, or other effects that are noticeable because it is such a rapid high and then brief intoxication. These sorts of things need to be known and be aware of, especially if you're a parent who has children or if you're someone who works with adolescents or pre-adolescents, to be aware that this is something that should be a concern and to be watched for. All right, well, that's just a brief overview of inhalants, what they are, what they do, the effect they have, and some of the dangers involved with them. If you'd like to learn more about this or related matters, underneath this video you'll see a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website that has that information, and while you're on that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. In today's video, we're going to go briefly and touch lightly upon Dr. Freud's theory of personality as it relates to the id and the ego and the way they interact. If we want to look at this model, we're talking about a psychological model of the structure of the mind. This does not correspond to places in the brain or to anything about us physiologically. You can't point to a part of the body or the brain and say that's where the id is, and that's where the ego is, and that's where the superego is. This has to do with our mind and Freud's theory about how people live and interact with the world. And he saw three different forces at work within people. He said that we are all born with this basic identity of pleasure seeking, or the id. The id is entirely consumed with self-gratification. If I'm hungry, I want food now. If I am uncomfortable, I want to be made comfortable now. It just wants to meet its needs. It is heedless and regardless of reality going on around it, of other people's needs, of other people's wants, whether it hurts someone else. And Freud would say this is seen most clearly in babies. If they're hungry, they cry. They get fed, they stop crying. If they have a dirty diaper, they cry. If they get changed and are made physically comfortable, they stop crying. If they're sleepy, they cry, and you put them to sleep, they stop crying. So it's whatever they need immediately, that's the id. This is the innate, born into us, selfish nature that says, I want what I want, and I want it now. It's the aggressive part of us, the pleasure-seeking part of us. It's all of our basic drives, hunger, sex, aggression, whatever. All those basic drives come out and are part of the id, and this is from birth. Then Freud said, around about the age 3, the ego starts to develop, and it's the ego's job to satisfy as much as possible the desires of the id while taking into account the reality around it. So by 3, the child is starting to realize that there are other people who also have wants, desires, and needs. It is also starting to realize that if it immediately tries to gratify itself, sometimes that leads to pain. And in order to maximize pain, the ego develops to satisfy the needs of the id while taking into account reality, other people's, other needs, other wants, and the best way, given the current state of affairs, the current reality, to prolong pleasure and to minimize pain. So the ego develops to moderate the id, but also to more adequately and over the long haul satisfy the id. So the ego's job, once again, is to meet the needs of the id. The id says, I want, I want, I want. The ego comes along and says, okay, you want, but here's the reality of the situation. In order for you to get what you want, we're going to have to withhold here, restrain here, pursue this, that, there. And that will lead to long-term pleasure, although it will sometimes hamper short-term gain. And we're going to want to avoid the short-term pleasure seeking as it may lead to more long-term pain later. And then around about the age 5, Freud said the superego starts to develop. This is the part that we would ordinarily call the conscience. It doesn't deal with the real, but more the ideal, what ought to be, the way things should be. And basically there's this conflict then between the superego, which says this is the way things ought to be based on the morality of society, and the id, which says I want this now, and the ego stands between seeking to rationalize, harmonize, and satisfy both poles. Society says this is the way things ought to be. I want this. Here's the way things are right now in reality. How can I keep the superego quiet, keep my conscience placated, and get what I want without long-term hurt based on the reality of the situation now? So the ego is the one who interacts between these opposing forces, but its primary job is to meet the needs of the id, those primal drives of hunger, aggression, intimacy, things like this, to meet those needs, but in a way that deals with reality. So remember, the id is the basic drives. It's based on pleasure, and it wants it now. Pleasure and aggression, basic drives, born with it. The ego is based on the reality principle. This is the way things are really happening right now. This is the current circumstance. How am I going to meet the current circumstance, satisfy the needs of the id, but not produce prolonged pain? So satisfies the id based on reality. The superego is the conscience and deals not with the real, but with the ideal, the way things ought to be as it is informed by the current culture and society. Born with the id, age 3, the ego starts to develop. Age 5, the superego starts to develop unless there are hindrances to that development. This is Freud's theory, then, of the interaction of the id and the ego. If you'd like to learn more about this or related matters, underneath this video you'll see a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website that has that information. While you're at that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. Those that are tasked with helping people make productive changes to their life, dealing with the pain and the stress and the hurt of dysfunctional life, have various approaches to, one, identifying problems, and two, finding a solution to those problems. One of the ways to both identify and help solve problems is the psychoanalytic approach. The psychoanalytic approach is also called the psychodynamic intervention approach, and it basically follows the following tenets. Just briefly, I want to just talk about the few feeder views that feed into this view so that you have maybe a broader idea where it comes from. So the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic intervention approach draws upon psychoanalytic theory, ego psychology theory, psychosocial theory, and object relations theory. So all of those things are drawn together and coalesce in this psychoanalytic approach. The key tenets that we want to talk about is, number one, the social environment in which the person exists is considered the primary external influence. Nothing is greater as an influence externally to the person than their social environment. So you must know the environment in which they're in and get all the information you can there to realize what external factors are feeding into the equation and causing the dysfunction and the problems. Second, behavior, how people act, flows from the unconscious mind and unconscious drive. So in many ways, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. It's flowing out of the unconscious mind, drives, motives, and those sorts of things. But their behavior flows out of that. So you've got the external factors of the social environment, and then internally, these unknown motives and drives from the unconscious mind. Next, dysfunction comes about by the stress produced through conflicts in the unconscious mind. So stress-producing experience and conflicts in the unconscious mind express themselves in dysfunctional behavior. So you've got the external influences of the social environment, you've got motives and drives coming from the unconscious mind producing behavior. Dysfunctional behavior shows that there is stressful conditions, that there is conflict causing experiences in the unconscious mind then being acted out in dysfunctional behavior. Finally, if you're going to get resolution to this, what you have to do is draw out the unconscious mind into the conscious mind. What's going on with them in places they don't know subconsciously, drawing that out into the open, into the conscious mind. By doing that, you actually produce stress. The reason it's in the unconscious mind is because they don't want to deal with it. And in some ways, the stress and the conflict has pushed it there. You draw it out, and you use the energy created from the stress and the conflict as it comes into the conscious mind to help produce changes. So you would talk them through it and say, look, I know this is painful, I know this is hard, let's do something about it. Let's actually use that energy productively to bring about a good change in your behavior, changes in your thoughts, changes in your behavior, changes in your environment so that things start moving in a good direction. So the key factors to remember here again in the psychoanalytic approach is that the primary external influence is always the social environment. All of our behavior flows from motives and drives found in our unconscious mind. Dysfunctional behavior is produced by stress-producing experiences and conflict in the unconscious mind, and the way to help alleviate that or change that or bring about good is to take the things that are in the unconscious mind, bring them forth into the conscious mind. It's stress-producing to do that, but then you help them use that energy from that stress to redirect them and promote positive changes in their life and their behavior. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can click on the link underneath this video. That link will take you to a website with that information, and also on that website you'll find there a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. I want to take just a few minutes to talk a little bit about psychotropic medications. And within this category, we are talking about medications that help deal with mental disorders. And you need to have a good working knowledge then of what these medications are, their benefits, their side effects, and their risks. With each medication based on what it's designed to do, and there are 3 categories that we're going to look at. Various medications have benefits for that category, but there are also side effects to be considered and even risks, certainly when we get to category 3 with the stronger psychotropic drugs. So once again, when you do talk about psychotropic medications, you need to realize that there are 3 different categories of these medications, and you need to have a good working knowledge of each one's benefits, side effects, and risks. So let's talk a little bit then about these medications. Category 1 medications are used to treat things like minor depression, anxieties, and they include all the anti-anxiety agents, sedatives, and hypnotics or sleeping pills. Category 1 medications affect the limbic system, and they produce a feeling of calm and sedation. So minor depression and issues related to sleeping or anxiety, and they want to produce calm, sedation, sleep, things like this. So that's the category 1, fairly minor, and yet there are benefits, side effects, and risks with each one. Category 2 treat major depressive disorders, and they include all the standard antidepressants. Under these categories in category 2, they include all the tricyclic and tetracyclic medications, the monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and stimulants. When we talk about treating severe depression, sometimes stimulants can be very useful in that regard. So category 2, major depression, the tricyclic, tetracyclic, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, things like this. Now when we get to category 3, this is where the real heavy-duty neurological and psychological issues are located. Category 3 treats major mental illness, things like schizophrenia and other psychoses. So in these medications, we're talking antipsychotics, anti-manic medications. If a patient is saying that they're having difficulties with hallucinations, delusions, peculiar behaviors, these sorts of things are treated by this category, category 3 drugs. They're the antipsychotics, the neuroleptics, the lithium carbonates, and there are 5 families of antipsychotics. The phenothiazines, the thioxanthines, the butyrophenones, the indolines, and the dibenzazepines are the main families within category 3 psychotropic medications. You need to be thoroughly versed in all these categories, knowing who's in what category based on what they're complaining of. Category 1 being the lightest, those having minor depression, sleep disorders, anxiety issues. Category 2, major depression, and category 3, true major mental illness here, the hallucinations, delusions, and very odd behavior. Be well versed in not only what system they affect, limbic system, things like this, but also the benefits, side effects, and risks. If you'd like to learn more about this, click on the link beneath this video. It'll take you to a website where there's more information, and there's a link on that website for an ebook for immediate download. Today I thought it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about validity, in this case testing validity, and when we think about something being valid or the validity of something, we're talking about the effectiveness or the accuracy of something. Accuracy and effectiveness would both be synonyms for the word validity, valid. And so when we think in terms of testing validity, we need to think of four things, four types of validity in testing. The first is content validity. This is a measure or assessment at how accurate a particular test is for what it's designed to measure. For example, a math test takes no measure of language skills, and that's not a problem because a math test is designed to test math skills or math knowledge. So under content validity, the only thing you're trying to assess or determine is how accurate, how effective is that particular math test at assessing math skills. So you're looking very narrowly at just the topic that the test is designed to cover. The next area of validity that we want to think about is construct. Construct validity. This is a measure that's actually a little more difficult to do because it's much more subjective. In this case, you're testing the effectiveness or the accuracy of an assessment to determine abstract things like leadership skill. How good is this person at leading, or some other subjective abstract concept. A little more difficult, but it's something that's important to be determined so that you can find out whether or not your test is accurate or effective and therefore valid. The third area we want to talk about in testing validity is concurrent. Concurrent validity has to do with determining whether or not your test stacks up to similar tests. How effective, how accurate is our test when compared to similar tests designed to test the same types of things. So we would compare our math test to someone else's math test and therefore come up with the concurrent validity. Content means how well do we determine math skills. Concurrent tells us how well does our math test stack up to other math tests. Is ours effective and accurate and therefore valid when compared to similar tests designed to test the same thing. And then finally, under testing validity, we want to talk about predictive. Predictive validity is the effectiveness or the accuracy of a test to predict future performance. Performance that has not yet happened, but should it happen, how good or how well would the person do based on their work on this particular test. And so the graduate record exam, the GRE, or the Scholastic Aptitude Test, the American College Test, the SAT, and the ACT are predictive tests. The SAT and the ACT are designed to predict how successful someone would be at undergraduate, college level work, and the GRE, of course, is designed to test how well someone might do at graduate level work. And they are examples of predictive tests, and therefore they can be assessed as to their ability to accurately and effectively or validly predict someone's performance at their particular level, either undergraduate or graduate. So when thinking about testing validity, you need to think in these categories. Content, how good is it at determining the skill for the particular area that it's written for. Construct validity has to do with subjective things, abstract things like leadership ability, how good is it at that. Concurrent is we're comparing our test with other similar tests covering the same area. And then predictive, how well are we able to predict someone's future behavior, future success based on how they do on this particular test. This is testing validity, and always keep in mind those words accuracy and effectiveness when looking at these particular categories.
There are several different types of depression. I've got a number of them listed on the board here. The distinguishing features are the symptoms, the severity of the symptoms, and the duration of how long they last. Three of them that are categorized by the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, an American Psychiatric Association publication. Three of those are the major depressive disorder, dysthymic disorder, and manic depression. Major depressive disorder, also known as major depression or clinical depression, has symptoms that last for most of the day, nearly every day, for at least 2 weeks. And it must have a number of additional symptoms such as significant weight loss, difficulty in sleeping, difficulty thinking, excessive feelings of guilt. Dysthymic disorder refers to a nearly constant depressed mood for at least 2 years with additional symptoms such as eating problems, sleeping problems, low energy, fatigue, low self-esteem. Manic depression includes periods of mania and depression, and there's a cycling between these two states that is an identifying mark of this type of depression. There's manic episodes where there's inflated self-esteem, decreased need for sleep, easily distracted. Someone that's more talkative than usual characterizes this type of depression. Other types of depression, you have postpartum depression. This is very common in women after they give birth, usually beginning within 4 weeks of giving birth and varying in duration and severity. Seasonal affective disorder, also known as SAD, is a type of depressive disorder that reoccurs at a specific time of the year. Seasonal is the key word there. Typically, this would be in the fall or winter, which can be drearier months of the year. And anxiety depression is not an official depression type as defined by the DSM, but anxiety is often occurring at the same time as depression with someone, and a depressed individual that exhibits lots of anxious symptoms may be diagnosed with this. Atypical depression, which is a subtype of the major depressive disorder, is characterized by a temporary improvement in mood in reaction to positive events, in addition with other symptoms such as weight gain, oversleeping, a heavy feeling in arms and legs, and a sensitivity to rejection. Chronic depression is a major depressive episode that lasts for at least 2 years. Here we've got double depression, which is someone that has dysthymia, which is chronic mild depression, and also experiences a major depressive episode, more severe depressive symptoms lasting at least 2 weeks. Endogenous depression. Endogenous means from within the body, and this type of depression is defined as feeling depressed for no apparent reason. So it's not an external thing, it's considered to be endogenous. Situational or reactive depression, also known as adjustment disorder with depressed mood. This develops in response to a particularly stressful situation or when someone is reacting to something, typically a relationship, problems at work or school. It does not meet the criteria for a major depressive disorder, and it's something that, as given the name, is situational. Agitated depression is a kind of major depressive disorder characterized with physical, emotional restlessness, irritability, and insomnia, and is the opposite, which is the opposite of many depressed individuals who have low energy and feel slowed down physically or mentally. Psychotic depression is a major depressive episode with psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations or delusions. Melancholic depression involves a loss of pleasure in virtually all activities or mood, and mood does not temporarily improve in response to a positive event. So if something good happens to the person, you think they should be more upbeat. Someone who is suffering from melancholic depression would not experience that. Catatonic depression is another subtype of a major depressive disorder, as many of these are, and is characterized with a loss of voluntary movement, an inability to react to one's environment. You think of someone that's catatonic and they're not responding to an environment or a stimulus. and they have extreme resistance to instructions or suggestions. They may be unwilling to speak. Those would be symptoms of catatonic depression. So as you can see, there's a lot of different forms of depression. You have the three major categories here. Many of these fall under a major depressive disorder characterization, and these are all important to understand and to know the differences of what can lead to each of these.
Stress. It's something that every human being goes through at one point in their life or another, often multiple times, and sometimes over a prolonged period. The universal human response to stress has been dubbed the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS for short. It has three stages. The General Adaptation Syndrome, or the GAS response to stress, has three stages, and we're going to go over those now. The first stage is called stimulation. At this stage, the stress has been introduced to the person, and their body responds by the hypothalamus stimulating the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine or adrenaline. Epinephrine and adrenaline are the same thing depending on what part of the world you're in. They're going to favor one or the other. Epinephrine is the Greek-derived word for this hormone, and adrenaline is the Latin-derived word for this hormone, but they're the same thing. So the hypothalamus stimulates the adrenal medulla and releases epinephrine. The glucose level rises, the heart and respiration rates increase, and the individual becomes alarmed. We've all experienced this. Stress comes in, things heat up, adrenaline or epinephrine is released, heart rate goes up, respiration goes up, and the person is in a state of readiness, alarm, fight or flight in some ways. So the gas response then is managed by the adrenal and the pituitary gland. So the first level then is stimulation. If the stress is not resolved at this level, then the second stage that the General Adaptation Syndrome goes to is resistance. At this stage, the body resists the stress by returning respiration and heart rates to baseline. The hypothalamus commands the pituitary gland to release ACTH, a hormone that causes the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. Cortisol is a chemical that maintains high levels of blood glucose. So this is once again the body's attempt to deal with whatever is bringing about the stress. So stimulation puts a person in an alarmed or heightened state. It persists. Resistance comes in, the body trying to bring things into line, into a normal state. Once again, the hypothalamus is critical to all this. In the initial stage, it stimulates the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine. In the next state, it commands the pituitary gland to release the hormone ACTH, which causes the adrenal cortex to release cortisol to keep the blood glucose levels high. Finally, if the stress is not resolved, the third stage for the general adaptation or GAS syndrome is exhaustion. Here, the pituitary and adrenal glands are utterly fatigued. The physiological processes start to break down. And it is this stage right here, this exhaustion stage, that if it is prolonged is most damaging to health. So stress management is extremely important. Stress comes into everyone's life. The universal response of every human being experiencing various levels of stress has been generalized as the GAS adaptation or the general adaptation syndrome. It has three stages: stimulation, resistance, and then exhaustion, this stage being the most damaging to health. The hypothalamus involved in this. First stage, releasing epinephrine. Second stage, releasing ACTH in order to get cortisol to come out and raise the blood glucose levels. And then finally, when the pituitary and adrenal glands are utterly fatigued, everything begins to break down and the health begins to deteriorate. If you'd like to read more and learn more about stress and find out exploration more in this area, then please click on the link beneath this video. It'll take you to a website where you can study further, and you'll also find an ebook there ready for immediate download.